A Writer's Odyssey arrives as a preordained international blockbuster. Chinese cinema has had a phenomenal year. With American and European cinemas largely closed due to the pandemic, 2020 marked the first time that the highest grossing films at the global box office were not Hollywood exports. Guan Hu's patriotic The 800 was the biggest film of the year, with the comedy anthology My People, My Homeland placing third. A Writer's Odyssey is in prime position to continue that trend. Adapted from Shang Zhetao's short story, it opened in the lucrative Lunar New Year slot and included a simultaneous international rollout to drive-in theaters in the United States. The film is co-written and directed by Liu Yang, whose previous efforts include the two Brotherhood of Blade movies, so it has clear blockbuster pedigree. A Writer's Odyssey is an ambitious movie, containing enough plot to sustain 3 or 4 smaller films. It opens on Guan Ning, a man desperately searching for his daughter who was kidnapped years ago. When his attempt to disrupt a child trafficking ring goes wrong, he finds himself aligned with a high-profile billionaire named Tu Ling. Ling is convinced that a series of recent health complications are tied to a fantasy novel being written by a young man named Kong Wen Lu. Kong Wen is writing a fantasy epic in which he has cast himself as a noble warrior against the brutal tyrant Lord Redmayne. Ling is convinced that his fate is tied to that of Lord Redmayne, and that when Kong Wen finishes the book, he'll kill Redmayne, and in doing so will also kill Ling. Naturally, Ling is less than thrilled with this possibility, so hires Guan Ning to kill the young writer on the promise of reuniting the man with his long-lost daughter. This is all in the opening 20 minutes of a film, and so gives a flavor of how much is going on, with the film constantly cutting between the real world and the fantasy novel, paralleling the events in the two timelines literally and thematically. This is without even getting into the film's revelation that it exists in a world where people have superpowers, and that Guan Ning has been chosen as his assassin in large part because he can throw rocks, well, really well. There's also a sentient and sassy suit of armor, presumably because Venom did really well at the Chinese box office. But that's a whole other discussion. It's enough, perhaps, to describe A Writer's Odyssey as Old Boy meets Lord of the Rings by way of adaptation, but with none of those threads given any room to breathe. There's a lot crammed into A Writer's Odyssey, and the film creaks under the strain. The movie suffers from incredible tonal whiplash, pivoting sharply from child trafficking to fan fiction and back again. There are a lot of big ideas here, with the movie touching on everything from corporate control of speech, to the suffering of writers, to the question of whether imagination is a communal resource. In fact, I can't help but feel that this movie about a tech and logistic billionaire obsessed with controlling a Lord of the Rings style fantasy is a subtweet of Jeff Bezos, even if I'm not entirely sure how, or why. But you know what? It kinda works if you can go with it. A Writer's Odyssey requires suspension bridges of disbelief, but it's propulsive and dynamic. Liu Yang leans heavily on techniques like cranking and zooming, giving the movie a decidedly old-fashioned action aesthetic despite all the CGI. The production design, whether practical or computer-generated, is highly saturated, lending the movie the feeling of a live-action cartoon that helps some of the logic go down a bit easier. A Writer's Odyssey is chaotic and disjointed, but if you can get on its wavelength, it's also good, stupid fun. A Writer's Odyssey is available to watch in selected theaters and drive-ins now.